Coming up today on Locked On Texas Tech, the position group under the most pressure to succeed in 2024 and why that's not the same group that's the most vital to the team's success this season. We're into it next on Locked On Texas Tech.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Great to be with you again on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, always free and available on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. And as always, we appreciate being your first listen. Today's episode brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. With the only Chris Level, I'm Casey Cowan. Chris, great to be back with you for a Hump Day edition of the program. And today we're going to spend time talking about one particular group that has been much discussed this offseason and will be highly monitored as we get into the season as it pertains to improvement and success from 23 to 24, and that is Juice Johnson's group of pass catchers. Obviously, some tight ends could fit into that mix also, but we'll confine it today to those on the outside. Among those wide receivers, we actually got to hear from Coach Johnson just a few days ago and wanted to get into some thoughts from him, talking about a priority whenever it comes to the Texas Tech passing game and what they're looking to establish in 2024. And then, of course, the newcomer that is highly anticipated among Red Raider fans to see take the field and maybe provide some explosiveness that was lacking last year. Josh Kelly, we'll get into some of what Coach Johnson feels like really makes him special. But first, let's take a listen to Coach Johnson in general, discussing the wide receiver room, what it's all about, and, of course, some of what they're drawing also from the past.
The room is pretty deep. All right, the room is deep, and I think that anybody that you put out there has an opportunity to go out there and make a play. And so, really happy about the depth of the room. I feel comfortable whoever's out there is going to make a play. The biggest thing with us is we've tried not to do a compare and contrast thing. Like the mentality of the team, is we've all been talking about like what's next. And so, although you learn from the past, we're not really sitting there and doing a compare and contrast of a last year's group versus a this year's group. The guys are just focused on task at hand and coming in and working their tails off day in and day out. So just really focus on just getting this year's group, the cohesiveness, the physicality we want to play with, and setting the culture of the unit within the confines of the team, just setting that within the unit. So really don't speak much about like, hey, this year's group versus last year's group. I've tasked these guys with understanding a lot of the background history too of the receiver play that's been here, from that time, from, Crab to Wes and those guys, and, so on and so forth, a lot of those guys, and talking about those guys. And so I think they understand they're hungry for that.
Some of what he's referencing there, Chris, as far as previous program success at that position and also the personnel additions this offseason at that position, I think could lead us into a conversation about a group that is under as much or more pressure, maybe than any other group on the team, to really improve and find some success this year.
A lot to get into with what he said there. I liked how he just wasn't going to get into comparing last year's group. It's a politically correct way of kind of saying, man, focused on right now and the future. However, not a lot of those guys that left were either we're not going to beg you to stay, or in fact, we may go, hey, man, if you want to leave, go for it. If there's something out there better for you in the portal, go for it, which is fairly telling. Miles Price, Jerron Bradley, Trey Cleveland 2 years ago, J.J. Sparkman, Loic Fungi. I mean, again, all good people, and just, again, I think needed a reset at this particular position. But I think it was Juice's way of kind of politely saying, we can't get into all that. It's just about what's the here and the now. And they certainly attempted to fix this with some different kinds of skill sets and some different proven resumes that they added, whether it be a high school resume like Micah Hudson or Josh Kelly in college, and then the potential of a guy like Caleb Douglas. And I think this spills over into the tight end group too. But I also really appreciate Juice because he doesn't really like, he's not going to get into the big like Josh Kelly or Micah Hudson or whoever hype train. He'll answer a question if asked, but he's not going to trumpet any one player or get caught up into a lot of what everybody else is talking about. It's about the group. It's as much about Brady Boyd and Jordan Brown as it is Coy Aiken and Josh Kelly and Micah Hudson and all that. And even Kelby Valson and TJ West and the list goes on. So that's why I think you hear him say, I love the group, but you can't pin him down. He's just a smart coach, and he's trying to coach all these guys. I do appreciate, because this is a fun conversation. I love it when coaches here tip their cap to the past, especially at this spot. There's you haven't churned out as many NFL guys as, say, LSU has or some other schools, but we can all sit here and tell you there is a tradition or a standard here at this particular position. There's some guys that have come through here that have been great. Not just good, but great. Not only at the college level, but the professional level as well. And we can sit here and talk. I could go 15, 20 deep of people really since Mike got here and the air raid era kind of began. But before that, it was Lloyd Hill and some folks like that. But I can just mention to you one name, and you're going to know exactly who I'm talking about, and probably the era that they played in. And I just think people forget how many good receivers you've had roll through here. And I think what I appreciate about him pointing is that it's okay to tell the Micahs and the Joshes and the Calebs and whoever you want to talk to, dude, there's some greatness that's walked through here before that's called footballs on that field. Like, so don't think you're like the first one. There's a standard. Like, the bar's up here. You need to meet it. We're not lowering it. But I mean, just think about this, Cowan. Tweezy, Kiki, Easy, E. Ward, Darren Moore, Amaro, Leong, and then you can go back further to like Francis and
Los
and Danny. Yeah. There's a long list, and I've probably forgotten something. I mean, Hicks and Filani, obviously. Danny, I think I mentioned him.
I think your only ever number one draft pick, Dave freaking Parks. I mean, you can take it back all the way to the black and white days if you want to talk pass catcher.
Jakeem. I mean, it's and there's a lot of these folks that are still in or had some time in the NFL, but it hasn't been good enough in the last couple of years. It just hasn't. And all those guys that we just talked about were good at, the big plays, the consistency, the touchdowns scored. I mean, do we realize that like Lau Leon caught more touchdowns, or the second most of anybody in school history? Do people realize this? 32. He had 19 in 1 year. If I were to tell you that one of these dudes this year were to catch 19 touchdown passes, do you realize the parade that you would start to throw, or the dance that you would do if I even suggested that? And you'd probably look at me like I was crazy. Like, that's darn near impossible. This is what Lau Leon did in 2010. And you see the was it the 12 or 1300 yard season that Tweezy had, and as Okama, and on it goes. So we need to get back to that. We as in the Texas Tech fan base podcast crew, we need to get back to seeing some guys make plays, have some juice. I mean, Nehemiah Glover, how fun was that boy back in the day?
Yep.
And where has that been? Because when I think about Nehemiah Glover, or like the Kikis, who is more of a modern day, it's all about what they do when they get the ball in their hands. And for the last couple of 3 years, it's been way too much. Everybody's a possession receiver, and that just makes everything more difficult. And I'm ready to graduate. Or I'm ready to go retro and like let's go back to how it used to be, so hopefully the group that is here now, that they are more capable and the skill set is there, because there is, man, bottom line, there is a standard here, and it's a pretty high standard as far as receiver play, specifically outside of receiver play. And there's been some dudes that have been running around through here, and we just need to, we need to see more of that, I guess, in the seasons to come, including this one.
Well, I mean, going into last year, you may have been hoping against hope that some guys were going to do some things for the first time for you in their Red Raider careers, things they had not done consistently prior to that, kind of like the hope that Jerron Bradley would take a step and be a consistent big game kind of guy, which we knew he had that potential, but unfortunately didn't see it come to fruition. It was another year last year where you saw some of those flashes. I mean, he was a large part of why you were able to squeak out and win on the road against the Kansas Jayhawks. But again, just didn't see it really take root consistently. Could be a more complex conversation as to why that didn't happen, obviously, when you're talking about the quarterback turnover and all the other things that we know contributed to a frustrating offensive year, or at least particularly in the area of the passing game. But I really do wonder, because of the standard that we're talking about historically, and because of all the conversation around the personnel additions within that group through this offseason. And it's not just like, hey, you shook it up and you brought some new faces in. No, you went out and you specifically targeted a certain type of wide receiver to add some explosiveness to that. And you were able to do that. Guys that had done it on this level, Josh Kelly, the best example of that. And then you go out and you land one of, or the highest rated prospect that you've ever landed before. And it's at this position also in Micah Hudson. So I wanted to ask you, is it fair to say that this group, that Juice Johnson and his guys, are under the most pressure of any position group on the team to show some success? Or do you think there are some others that might come to mind? First, today's episode brought to you by Gametime. Never sweat buying tickets to your favorite event again with Gametime. It's always a breeze using the Gametime app, where you're going to find the best last-minute deals, and I love being able to scout out a view from any seat before pulling the trigger. And of course, you're always doing it at the lowest price, guaranteed. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event, and even an hour after it begins, which means you can finish off that final brat, that final beer, at your own pace at the tailgate, because Gametime is the place to find last-minute seats to any event. Gametime gives you the fastest and easiest way to buy tickets, but not just fast, also secure and simple to use. So right now, download the Gametime app and create an account and use our promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem our code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today for last-minute tickets at the lowest price, guaranteed. Is it fair to say that this group, that Juice Johnson and his guys, are under the most pressure of any position group on the team to show some success? Or do you think there are some others that might come to mind?
I love this question because it's not exactly easy to answer, which is what makes it such a good question. I guess I would, if you wanted to, like, okay, who could you make an argument for other than like the offensive skill? I think you could easily do the same, have the same conversation about the offensive line. I think it's got some pressure. Obviously, there was a position coach change, and there was some portal additions that were ready-made. And so it's like, okay, there should be some expectation there. I think you could also probably make this with quarterback too. In that, and in some way, we're tying all this in together because it's really all kind of one. But yeah, I think I would say this, because the difference between this, Barron's situation and Tyler Shook's situation last year, it was injury. Okay, that's part of the deal. Offensive line wise, last year, somewhat injury, but you switch coaches before spring football. And, I think while you bring in some guys with some street cred, some guys that are experienced and all that, you didn't bring anybody that's just like, oh my gosh, like, look out. Yeah. You brought in solid players, and maybe Vinny Scurry could be this, and but you clearly were trying to upgrade that position, and I would say that maybe that group has more to do with whether you'll win or lose than the skill players. However, I'm going to agree with you in that the most pressure is on the offensive skill, because here's why, in my opinion. There's a lot of credentials that come with this particular group, namely Josh Kelly, namely Micah Hudson, namely Jalen Conyers. I think Caleb Douglas, with the potential that he's got, and there was some fanfare there with him as a recruit and all those things. But you're talking 5-star rating, you're talking potential NFL lists that some of these guys are on, these tight ends and Kelly. I think you have multiple, like, I think the offensive line has like one Caleb Rogers. Okay, one. This receiver group, they have a Dre McCray, they have a Coy Aiken, they have a Brady Boyd, they have more folks that have been in the program that are ready to play right now than that offensive line group does. So, and I just think that this particular group, if they play well, makes everybody's life easier. Makes the play caller look better, the quarterback look better, and the offensive line look better. If you can just break a tackle or three, look out. I mean, and then I just want to see a ball carrier sprinting down Jones AT&T with the ball in his hands because somebody busted a coverage. You broke a tackle. You caught one over the middle, and then look out. He's really got some speed. I mean, think about all these things that we've been missing.
Wait, you're talking about a ball carrier in our colors?
Sure.
Texas. Okay, yeah, that's preferable.
Yes.
We would prefer that.
Or a ball, somebody with the ball in their hands that caught it, So it just feels like that's been painful to achieve in recent years.
Sluggish, plodding, those types of things come to mind when you think about how to describe Texas Tech offensive drives in some recent seasons. And I think you nail it, really, because more vital to the team's success, offensive line by a million miles, in my opinion. Like, if the team really wants to make a jump, then the offensive line is under the most pressure to be better and perform. And you might put them in tandem with the defensive front as well, because I think they're of somewhat equal importance. But because of the credentials, which you mentioned, and is the perfect way to describe it, I think you might actually look to the wide receiver room and say, no, I actually have a more justifiable expectation that you will improve. Like the offensive line, we really need you to improve. Do I have an expectation that you will improve? I'm about 50-50 coin flip on that right now. So it's not a real high bar necessarily as far as the expectation, but I think, again, because of the credentials for the wide receiver room, you view them in a different way, and I think that puts them under the most pressure. So we'll be curious to hear from viewers and listeners as to whether or not you agree or disagree. And I'd like to tie this into another thought from Juice Johnson that I guess I can say it took me by surprise. Maybe it shouldn't, but out of all the things to kind of point at as far as being a priority for the passing game, I was a little surprised that this was the aspect or area of it that he did go to. And I do wonder how much it might tie into the offensive line and the quarterback helping out these kinds of things. So what was it that he actually described as a priority this year for the passing game? We'll let Juice Johnson tell you.
Getting the screen game going is really important, right? Getting the ball out of the quarterback's hand, protecting B, and then getting it to our playmakers and letting them go be special, right? Letting them use the gifts that they were given. And so with that is just blocking on the perimeter to get the screens going, setting the screens up the right way and then just hitting it. I talk to them all the time, old school Crabtree, you used to watch Crab, he'd take a screen, he catch it on the right hash, he might finish on the left.
I thought that was pretty interesting that among all the things that you might come up with, he pointed to the screen game, and it kind of ties into what you're talking about, breaking some tackles, picking up some blocks, and allowing these playmakers to do what they have been able to do so far with the ball in their hands.
I can't guarantee you that in any game you're going to complete a pass that's over 30 or 40 yards or 50 yards or whatever. And some you won't even attempt many of those. They take a shot here and there. I can guarantee, bank it, Sharpie it, you're going to attempt and complete several screens in a game. And when the blocking gets blown up, because it's an easy throw, it protects the offensive line because we get the ball out quick. It protects the quarterback. It gets the ball out quick. It's an easy touch for one of the guys we want to feature or feed. And it's the possibility of a 2-yard gain, a 2-yard loss, or a 50-yard gain. And I think you want to see more of the 50-yard or ish variety, and that requires some wiggle, some juice, some, and I think what juice is talked about is this is the same thing when it comes to running back. Well, why can't he be like an every down back? Well, because he can't pick up the blitz. He's going to get blown up and get the quarterback killed when we put him in there on third down, and here comes these 240-pound guys around the edge. We can't put him in there. He won't hold up. Same thing at receiver. You can't play. It's not about the catch all the time. You've got to run guys off sometimes, but then a lot of times you gotta be a blocker, because I'm trying to remember the phrase. It was like no block, no catch, or no block, no play, or no. Forgot what was said, but it was kind of this acronym, because you could talk about you're open all the time. You want to go catch this amount of passes and receptions and be this, but if you can't block out there, then I can't. You can't be just so one-sided with it. And I think there was maybe some criticism for last year's group. I will say this, like J.J. Sparkman, I think they put him in two block. He was very almost one-sided. You never really targeted him. But I think it's fair to wonder how good of a blocker Miles Price was, or, Jerron Bradley was at times. But that's what Juice, I think, is talking about. And that's maybe why there was so much change here at this particular position, because I need more well-rounded. I'm not asking you to do anything that because every one of these dudes is going to be on the receiving end of a screen or pass, and they're all going to be in a position where they're having to block for somebody else that's doing the same thing. So everybody's an equal here, and you're going to be on both sides of this. And if you can't prove that, that you can hold up right there, whether it's physically or just because you do or don't have the want to, it's just the game within the game, I think, a little bit. And you used to be like Eric Ward. His nickname was Hammerhead. Yeah. Why? Because he would knock your block off down the field when the ball was elsewhere, or he saw somebody. He like, I'm about to get me some right here, and then he'd spring a play. The herald to a Robert Johnson pass in College Station. Who do we remember as much of? It's Shannon Woods. Yeah, just chip that running back enough. And the receivers don't get near the credit, but that is such a huge part of the position that they play.
Well, it's kind of funny if you remember a wide receiver's highlight, and he had plenty of them, I do remember, but if one of them is a block, then they were really vicious in that area. And I remember Eric Ward in Norman, Oklahoma, I think on an Alex Torres touchdown pass, may have been a screen or kind of a jailbreak sort of setup, but I remember Eric Ward absolutely leveling a Sooner like it was yesterday. And I thought you were going to say they called him Hammerhead because Decapitator didn't roll off the tongue as well, but either one carries the same point. But before we move on, I want to wrap up with Josh Kelly and a thought from Coach Johnson on what is the bell cow of this wide receiver group, and that is Josh Kelly. With all due respect to Micah Hudson, Kelly has done it on this level and is thought to be a proven commodity again as a dynamic college receiver. And I want to get to one area in particular that Coach Johnson pointed out as far as what makes Josh Kelly special. But before we get there, let's take it back about 15, 20 years. It's kind of hard to wrap my mind around it being that far back. But back to the Mike Leach era, and correct me if I know Dennis Simmons was in the mix at that point as far as some leadership. If there's another guy that was in that era when Simmons wasn't on patrol, point out who that is. But these guys took great pride in their blocking. They were a very physical wide receiver group. How the hell did they pull it off? Was it just talking about it all the time, demanding it all the time? Do you remember specific drills or things they would go through in practice? Because that was a standard. I mean, I remember that just being a constant. And kind of like you're saying, if you're going to play, then you're going to block. Or the inverse of that, if you're not blocking, you're not playing. So what do you remember about that era and how they actually were able to set that standard? What do you remember about that era and how they actually were able to set that standard?
I think it was about recruiting the right guys. You were never getting, in some of these eras, you're never getting, you're getting the 3-star type prospect. Pretty good, had plenty of opportunities elsewhere, but they're not no-brainers. Like a lot liked them, and then plenty were like, I like a lot of other people better than this particular player. Okay, so you're always dealing with, at some level, the chip on the shoulder kind of player in some cases.
Gotcha.
And it was about scheme too, like who fits what we want to do here. But I think they used to, it was a focal point. Like nothing used to frustrate Coach Leach any more than it wasn't about the play you were making. It's the one you screwed up on that everybody's following the football, but it's the missed block or the holding penalty, when you're on a receiver screen and whatever, and we got to call it back because you whatever it may be. But that was always and I think like Tommy Maynard was a really good coach in this, and he coached with Neil and Sonny Cumbie. It was like on the Tuberville part, but I mean Tommy Maynard. I'll never forget this. He had Eric Ward and Darren Moore the year that Tubbs went to the 50-yard line and bolted, and cruised. That year, Tommy Maynard was the outside receivers coach. He had Darren Moore and Eric Ward, both of them over 1,000 yards. And then Tommy Maynard looks up and he's like, I don't have any employment anymore. And he literally could not have done his job any better than what he did. No two players were more productive than his. And yet that's college sports. But that was one of the things that those two guys were really good at. They were big, physical. Eric's not the tallest guy, but he just played so much bigger. And Tommy drew that out of them. Like, Jerron Bradley was big too. I don't know if we would say that. I'm not trying to pile on, but I mean, I think there was times where, he shrunk or he didn't play as big as you would want him to be. But I think it's all about coaching. And I think Juice has done a great job of kind of trying to, suck this out of these guys and like demand it, because you can't just come here and want to catch. Hey, young fella, 5-star, now that we got you now, it's about this as much as it is that. And that's a standard, and you have to, and that's culture.
Man, hopefully that is going to be back to being a part of this culture very soon as far as Tech pass catchers are concerned. Before we get out of here, as I mentioned, the guy that is leading this group, that being Josh Kelly, a new addition, so not exactly an easy spot for a newcomer to be in, but all eyes are on him to really set the standard. And I was interested to hear in part of what Juice Johnson had to say about one particular aspect that he really felt like Kelly was skilled at, and a lot of it sounds like has to do with instinct. Here again is Juice Johnson.
I would say this about Josh. He has a high level football IQ and a high level spatial awareness. So he's very aware where like his spots are. Like if you're playing zone, he's going to find the hole in the defense. And the beautiful thing is with him, if you're playing man-to-man, he's savvy enough and really crafty enough to move a defender off a spot to get to his blade of grass that he's trying to get to. And so he has he has everything in his bag. And so he can line up outside and take you one-on-one because he has that. And then he can line up inside and uncover versus zone defense. And so, when you got a guy that's like that can do that, you can have the opportunity to move him in and out. And so he'll play in and out, and we'll let whoever we're playing figure out, when that is when we see him.
I thought that was a really cool thing to hear about a guy that we know has a ton of physical skill and just some intangible gifts that not everybody has. But they say that football is a game of inches, and it's not just because sometimes you come up short on fourth down as it relates to the yard marker, but it's also about leverage, right, on the field and finding that spot or getting the DB or whoever's across from you to lean this way or lean that way when you're going the other way. And it takes something between the ears, something kind of in the gut, I think, to be able to do that. And that's why I say instinct. And it sounds like he's really got that in spades.
All those guys that we mentioned that have been good ones and great ones previously, there's maybe not, it's not unanimous, but more often than not, one trait they were all good at. We're talking everywhere from Jakeem, who was 5'5", 5'6", maybe, to the Darren Moores and some of these folks that are 6'4", okay? Different speed combinations, different ball skill combinations. I mean, all the different things. So you got small, medium, and large, all these guys. One common trait that you can find amongst all of them is the ability to understand how they're being defended and then how to attack it. And are you playing zone? Are you playing man? Are you trying to bracket me? Are you trying to, where is my leverage? And Danny Amendola made a living off of this. Just go find green grass and sit down. Eric Morris was another one.
Morris is what I was thinking about also.
Yeah. Emo. Absolutely. They have the ability to go, because some of these guys just love zone coverage because there's holes there. They just go find grass and sit. And then it's a matter of the quarterback knowing where you're going to be and finding it. This is why Mike used to run, and part of a lot of the air raid principles, there's a lot of shallow cross routes because it's a very difficult route to cover, especially when you're in zone, because guys are sitting there covering your area and you got guys coming. It's like, okay, which way am I looking? Who do I follow? It puts the defense in a bind. But that list of previous players, more often than not, almost all of them really good at understanding how you're trying to take me away or what you're in. And I think Josh Kelly, this is just part of experience, but some guys just have the instincts there and they kind of have a feel for it. Are you showing me this? And, are you going to, act like you're going to press me and then bail and run? And the good ones will go, okay, you're bailing out and going to run. Well, I'll just run 5 yards and stop. And then we've got to have that, there's just a million little nuances and timing things, but Josh is really good at it. What's the word I've always used with him is polished. Mm-hmm. He's not the biggest, fastest in any of that, but he just runs good routes. He's got a very high IQ. He's quick. He's sudden, great hands, but very polished with everything that he does. And really, it's just about timing and being on the same page with Barron. If so, look out.
Yeah, that's the other aspect of it is establishing that synergy with the quarterback, and hopefully, a quarterback that's able to practice has a better opportunity to do that probably. So hopefully that's a part of Barron Morton's 2024 experience, and that leads to great things within the passing game. Chris, appreciate the insights. It's always fun to call back on some of our favorites from years gone by. And, man, hopefully this group is going to provide some names that in years to come will also be featured in that same kind of light when we're remembering some of the great impact of 2024. So no pressure other than all the pressure, as we've already established on today's episode. Chris, enjoyed it, man. Appreciate the time as always, and we'll see you for the next one.
Guns up, people.
Get subscribed on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for making us your first listen. And for your second listen, check out Locked On College Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, also on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. And of course, one of the best ways to help us grow the show is to comment anything below. Thanks to those who do that regularly. For Chris, I'm Casey. We appreciate you being out there and hope to see you back for the next round on Locked On Texas Tech.